Look at how she moves. This is like Jello on springs. It's some kind of built-in motor or something. I tell you, it's a whole different sex. Good evening, everyone. This is Stone Gasman live from New York City, and tonight we will be having some fun because we're about to watch Some Like It Hot, the legendary Billy Wilder comedy from 1959, starring Marilyn Monroe, Jack Lemmon, and Tony Curtis. And I actually took this as a request. This was the first time I actually took a request from one of the watchers of my commentaries. And I'm glad I'm doing this because I did The Chocolate War a couple of nights ago. You know, very, very heavy film based on one of the most banned books in America. Well, now it's time to have some fun. It's now time to have some fun with a true classic of the comedy genre. And honestly, I saw this film for the first time when I was maybe 7, 8 years old, and I actually fell in love with it immediately. I mean, I saw this film hundreds of times when I was growing up in Northern Virginia, and my father had actually illegally recorded this movie, as we did a lot of movies back in the early mid '80s. And Some Like It Hot was one of those films that here again I just watched countless times. It's my favorite Marilyn Monroe film by far. Definitely one of my favorite Jack Lemmon films. And it's definitely a favorite among Billy Wilder's films, although to be perfectly honest, I'll be talking about some other Billy Wilder films that I actually have a bit more love for as well. But at any rate, everyone should be paused at Ashton Productions Incorporated presents a Mirish Company picture. Now, I don't know if you're going to be watching this at Amazon Prime or any other outlet where it's streaming, but if you have the MGM logo, be sure to go through that. This basically the same thing as the Chocolate War on Thursday night. Make sure you play through the MGM logo and pause at Ashton Productions Incorporated presents a Mirish Company picture. And I'll just put a reminder right here. This is where you're supposed to be paused and everything. So we're going to get started in less than a minute here. And I don't have much to say as far as an introduction is concerned, except for the fact that I know practically every line of dialogue in this film by heart. But the weird thing is that after I left home and joined the Navy for 8 years, I didn't see it for a long time after that. I remember I had a pretty crappy old MGM DVD, and I never upgraded to Blu-ray. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was working at a music store, a movies and music store, and it was about the time that Michael Jackson died. And I know that there were companies trying to get this film on Blu-ray, and eventually MGM did put it on Blu-ray, but I never bought it. And unfortunately, my old MGM DVD got lost a while ago. So I haven't seen this movie in probably 15 years, maybe 20 years. It's been a while. And yet I still know every beat, every line, every laugh by heart. I mean, like I said, this is one film that I just watched countless times when I was growing up, and I thoroughly enjoyed it each and every time. And it was one of the few classic movies that I would show to friends whenever I had friends over. I mean, I very rarely showed a movie that came out before the 1980s. But Some Like It Hot was one of them. And like I said, I'll be talking about this Criterion Blu-ray, which came out in 2018. But it should be noted that Some Like It Hot has just been recently blessed with a 4K a 4K version, which I'm going to double check real quick who put that out. It was Kino Lorber. Yeah, on February 8th of this year, they put out a 4K version of Some Like It Hot, and I'm pretty sure it has many of the same bonus features, although there are several new commentaries. one with film historian Joseph McBride, and another with Paul Diamond, the son of the co-writer IAL Diamond, which is only on the 4K Blu-ray disc. Now, the regular Blu-ray discs has some stuff that we've seen before, like on the Criterion, and there's other things that are not available. So, but if you have a 4K player, make sure you go to Kino Lorber, give them some support and buy Some Like It Hot on 4K. Now, without further ado, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. But right before I press play, I just want to say hi to a few people in the chat. Katrina, I love seeing you here. Glad you can make it. And Rob Gasper, how you doing tonight, dude? Yeah, like I said, we're about to have some fun with a genuine classic. And like I said, anybody who comes in, please let your presence know in the chat and give me anything you want to know on Some Like It Hot, anything you want to share about Some Like It Hot, and I'll be more than happy on sharing it on screen here. So, at any rate, we are paused at Ashton Productions Incorporated presents a Marish Company picture, and we will go ahead press play on the count of 3. See, 3, 2, 1, and play. And I'll be sure to put on subtitles here. Let's see. All right. And here we are with the main cast: Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis, and Jack Lemmon in Some Like It Hot. I got the title on my screen right now. I'm so excited for this. I mean, I really love this film. George Raft, Pat O'Brien, Joe E. Brown, and Nehemiah Pertsoff. We will talk about all those guys as we go along. And here's a wonderful supporting cast here, which we will also talk about in detail. Screenplay by Billy Wilder and IAL Diamond, suggested by a story by 2 other guys. As a matter of fact, this was inspired by a German movie. I forget the name of it because the truth of the matter is the only connection that this German movie has, and it was remade in 1951, and that's where they got the idea for the script from. Basically, these 2 musicians are just looking for work, and they can't find work anywhere until they dress up as women and they join an all-female band. But here's the thing: that's pretty much the only connection that German movie has with this movie, because as we will see, there's a whole gangster subplot with this movie, produced and directed by Billy Wilder. And here we start in Chicago. And we'll actually see on screen Chicago 1929. But the first 2 minutes of this movie is unique in that there's no dialogue. Of course, 1929 was the year that, silence were being phased out and sound finally creeped into the motion picture industry with the release of The Jazz Singer in 1927. And this film has a lot of connections to that era, specifically with many of these classic older actors actually started out in Hollywood in the late 1920s. Many of them, not all of them. I mean, the 3 stars, they were pretty much born in the mid 1920s. Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis were actually born the same year in 1925. But many of these actors who we will see and meet later actually got their start in Hollywood in the late 1920s, and 1927, 28, 29, and 1930. And as we can see, these obviously these gangsters are being pursued by the Chicago police here. There's some great stunts here. And if this opening looks familiar to you, it's because in the Goonies, they actually showed a segment in the Goonies where Corey Feldman in the beginning is actually, watching the TV as his father is working on the sink and fixing the plumbing. Now, great opening because you see all this liquid coming out of the coffin here, and it's really not a dead body, but in fact lots of liquor. This is in fact in the middle of Prohibition, and the Volstead Act unfortunately made alcohol very much illegal for 13 years from I believe 1920 to 1933. And during this time, there was a general disregard for the law. There was gangsters that took advantage of the illegal liquor market in Chicago. One of them, the most notorious, being Al Capone, who has several connections with this movie. And this, of course, is the head of this gangster syndicate played by George Raft, who we will talk about a lot later. We will talk about George Raft a lot later, but for right now, as we see the cops surrounding this funeral home, which is where, I mean, all the liquor went to, so they can basically bust the joint up. Back in the day, they used to call these speakeasies. Now, these two actors right here, one of them on the right, the actor on the right is named Pat O'Brien, and he actually starred with James Cagney in a lot of movies. And as a matter of fact, he went to Marquette University with Spencer Tracy, and they both served in World War I together. And but he really made his mark in a lot of pictures with James Cagney, who was known as, of course, one of the big gangster actors of the early 30s. In 1934, he was in like Here Comes the Navy. He did other films like Broadway with George Raft. In fact, he's going to have a scene here with George Raft in a minute. They worked in a 1942 film together called Broadway. And funnily enough, his very last movie was in 1981, which was the Milos Forman film Ragtime, which also served as the final film for the great James Cagney. Now, you know, he gives the password, "I've come for, grandma's funeral." And, you know, they just open up a door, and here we have a speakeasy joint where everybody is enjoying alcohol. Like I said, this was made at a time when alcohol was very, very much illegal. And, unfortunately, you know, a lot of gangsters took advantage of that and just, you know, started, taking as much control of the city as possible so they can, you know, get rich by selling liquor in all these speakeasies. Booze. No, sorry, sir. We only serve coffee. Okay. Yeah. Make it a demitasse with soda on the side. Yep. Now, I mean, the police detective here asked for a table not too close to the band, and he's rejected because you see the table there that's reserved, which is really for George Raft and his henchmen, because essentially they do own this place. Of course, they'll deny it later, but yeah, they do own this place. Poor guy just wanted another cup of coffee. Yep. Now, in the film, George Raft is known as Spats. Pretty unique nickname. Now, George Raft is interesting because he starred in, next to Paul Muni, he starred with Paul Muni in my favorite gangster film of all time, which, of course, is the 1932 version of Scarface. As you can see there, Paul Muni in Scarface, George Raft, and Boris Karloff. Now, we'll talk about George Raft, like I said, a lot later, but we really need to introduce our two principal main characters here, Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon. And like I said, both these actors were born in 1925, although Curtis didn't really become a major star until the late 1950s. By that time, Jack Lemmon had already won an Academy Award for his role in Mr. Roberts as Ensign Pulver in Mr. Roberts. And they both served in the Navy together, believe it or not. Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis both served in the United States Navy during World War II. And as a matter of fact, Tony Curtis actually witnessed from literally a mile away when the Japanese surrendered in 1945. He was actually there for that. So, I mean, they probably had lots of conversations behind the scenes where they talked about their war experiences and their acting experiences. Now, here we go. Suppose Mary Pickford leaves Douglas Fairbanks. Now, funnily enough, I mean, of course, Mary Pickford, of course, was the silent film queen of the 1920s, and she excelled by playing a lot of roles as young girls, even though she was in her mid-20s. And admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of Mary Pickford. I mean, in 1929, she practically gave herself the Oscar for Best Actress for a movie that nobody remembers called Coquette. I mean, even historians would probably have a difficult time trying to find Coquette to watch because it's pretty bad. And Mary Pickford's performance is pretty bad in it. But at any rate, her brother, Jack Pickford, was actually married to another silent film star called Marilyn Miller. And that Marilyn Miller is where Marilyn Monroe got her first name from when other people were tasked with changing her from Norma Jean Baker to somebody else, and she took on that persona of the the dumb platinum blonde, which she of course became very famous for. Now, like I said, Pat O'Brien and George Raft, they had worked together before in a 1942 film called Broadway, so they were very familiar with each other by this time. Now, obviously this is considered the #1 comedy of all time by the American Film Institute. But the funny thing is that there's not a lot of comedy in these opening scenes. I mean, we'll talk about the henchmen in a minute, specifically the henchmen all the way to the left and the henchmen all the way to the right, which have very unique, distinctive faces. And I believe they're the only two henchmen with dialogue in this movie, and that's why they were given credit. The other two guys are not given credit because they do not have any lines of dialogue. And of course, this poor guy just still wants his cup of coffee. I mean, you would think that would have been a running gag, throughout the rest of the movie. But of course, we're not going to stay in Chicago for long as Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon make their escape. Now, we're going to see him again very soon, but the actor that played Toothpick Charlie, of course, with a toothpick in his mouth, he's played by an actor named George E. Stone, and we're going to see him in a minute when we get to the massacre in the garage. But he started out in 1927 with films like Seventh Heaven with Janet Gaynor, who won the very first Academy Award for Best Actress that year. Janet Gaynor was the first Best Actress winner in 1927 for Wings, and oh no, I'm sorry, she won for Sunrise. She won for Sunrise, which won the Artistic and Unique Production in 1927. And then Mary Pickford, of course, won by practically giving the Oscar to herself in 1928. But okay, now even as a kid, I always disliked Tony Curtis's character because I got to mention this. The thing is that in the movie, he's basically a womanizer, and this relationship that he has with Jack Lemmon it's very. I mean, they're supposed to be, I guess, partners, essentially, quote unquote, partners in crime, I guess you could say. But Tony Curtis is practically the dominant one in the relationship. I mean, hell, I would be pissed off if he gambled away my coat just to try to double the money. And here again, it is during this is during the Great Depression after the stock market. Well, actually, to be honest, you could say, I mean, it doesn't have a specific date. So we're not absolutely sure if this was before or after the Great Depression. I mean, the massacre that takes place when we get to it, of course, was inspired by the St. Valentine's Massacre, which took place on February 15th, 1929. But of course, the stock market crash wouldn't happen until very late in the year. So this is practically right before that. Maybe, but it's in the winter. So we don't know if it's January or February or if it's December. I mean, it could be either one, but we don't know exactly for sure. This is one of the few actresses right here that plays Nellie, who one of the few actors I wasn't able to find any information on whatsoever. But she is given credit, so that's something. 3 weeks in Florida, yeah. So, they're obviously looking for work after the speakeasy got raided and everything. So they go and meet with their agent, played by Billy Gray, who is the bald man right here on the phone, with a heavy Yiddish accent. And he was a comedy club owner. He worked with Abbott and Costello on radio shows in the 1940s. But he only made 4 films in his career. He only made 4 films. Thankfully, Billy Wilder did give him credit on this movie. And the last movie he made was in 1962 called Two for the Seesaw with Robert Mitchum. And he had a comedy club for probably 20, 30 years. And when the comedy club closed, he basically resorted to alcohol and died penniless. But he has a pretty cool little role here as the agent. Now, and the 2 actors here that we'll talk about later, of course, are Joan Chawley as Sweet Sue, and also Dave Barry as Beanstalk. And of course, they're looking for 2 musicians who, unfortunately, 2 female musicians, of course, who one of them got pregnant and another one ran off with the Bible salesman. So they need a sax and a bass fiddle. But of course, they're having a difficult time trying to find women who play those instruments because they're in a hurry. They're getting on the train the next day to go down to Florida to the Seminole Ritz in Miami to play. You got to be blonde. We could dye our hair. I like how Tony Curtis, like when he says you got to be blonde, he doesn't say anything. It's like I don't know about that. But Jack Lemmon's like, well, we can dye our hair. What's the big deal? And of course, it showcases how desperate they are for work. That they are. At least Jack Lemmon's character is willing to go all the way and actually dress like a woman and pretend to be part of this band in as they go down to Florida. That's a great line. You flipped your wig, little padding here and there, and we call ourselves Josephine and Geraldine. Yep. Now, the cross-dressing aspects of this movie was fairly controversial at the time. You got to remember this was back during before the Motion Picture Association was formed. That they had this old production code that had been strictly regulated since the 1930s. From 1929 to 1934, all the films that came out in that very special period were known as pre-code films, and thus they can get away with subtle hints at like gay relationships and abortion and anything else that was deemed objectionable by basically a bunch of politicians that wanted to make money and keep tabs on the motion picture industry, which they felt was going to do great harm to the American public. But yeah, so in 1929, they were known as pre-code films. And it's kind of, I think it's kind of fitting that this movie, when it came out in 1959, marked practically the end of that era where for the past 30 years, the strict production code would be in effect. And, but this film broke a lot of rules. And in fact, Billy Wilder's next film, which was The Apartment, would break even more rules. Yeah. The Apartment, I'll talk about a little about this movie later, but, that's probably my favorite Billy Wilder movie. And I consider it, his masterpiece. Now, here the musicians are arriving in the garage, and here again, this was based on the St. Valentine's Massacre, which took place on the north side of Chicago on February 15th, 1929. And a lot of people suspect Al Capone was behind it, although that was never actually proven, despite the fact that the people that were killed essentially had been hijacking whiskey that had come from Canada by the river. So essentially, they were, Al Capone's enemies. And of course, in Scarface, which had George Raft, he played Scarface's right-hand man. And of course, Scarface was based on Al Capone himself. So there's a bit of a connection here. Now, another interesting connection is that Joan Shawley, who we just saw as Sweet Sue, who runs the music band that go down to Florida, she was actually in a 1967 film called The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which is based on this real-life massacre. So that's another interesting connection, even though she has nothing to do with this. And none of the sycophants, Sweet Sue or Beanstalk, they have no idea about any of this gangster stuff. I mean, they basically just serve as an escape for the musicians when they witness this very brutal gangster slaying on the north side of Chicago. The great George Raft making a great entrance here. Well, I mean, we saw him earlier, but I like how the music, how Adolf Deutsch's music was brought up there to let him know that he's all business. I mean, he's, and he wants to get back at Toothpick Charlie for calling him out. Now, before he leaves the screen, I should say a little bit more about Toothpick Charlie. George E. Stone, I think I mentioned already that he was in Seventh Heaven, but he also played the supporting role of Otero in Little Caesar, the famous gangster film from 1931. And there's actually a few more connections to Little Caesar that we'll bring up later. But George E. Stone, he was also in the 1931 Oscar winner for Best Picture, Cimarron. He was also in The Front Page, also 1931. 42nd Street in 1933. But probably his most famous role was as the right-hand man of Boston Blackie, who was a jewel thief based on an actual character. And in the 1940s, Columbia Pictures had a long run of B pictures where George E. Stone played the runt. The only exception is he wasn't in the first Boston Blackie movie and the last Boston Blackie movie. There's George E. Stone as Toothpick Charlie trying to get to the phone in this very, very tense scene. And he's about to be killed right here. There's not a lot of blood in this movie. I mean, obviously here again, they're hedging their bets because of the production code and everything. But man, I mean, all you need to see is him shooting that Tommy gun, and you can tell that, oh man, he met a horrible, horrible death right there. Well, he actually has blood coming out of his mouth. That's probably as far as they could go. So he played the runt in the Boston Blackie series in the 1940s, which was a series of Columbia Pictures. And then in the 1950s, he had a couple roles in like The Robe, which was one of the first 3D movies. The Man with the Golden Arm with Frank Sinatra, which was about drug use. And he was also in Ocean's 11 and Bells Are Ringing. Babyface Nelson, a gangster film based on a real-life gangster, which came out in 1957. Some Came Running in 1958. And yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then his last film was actually a Frank Capra remake called Pocketful of Miracles in 1962, which was a remake of the 1933 film Lady for a Day. Now, I like the idea that Jack Lemmon's character doesn't think to call the agent back but it's actually Tony Curtis, and because he thought to himself, you know what, this is probably the only way we're going to be able to get out of this jam and survive and get away from these gangsters, is actually to pretend to be women and join this all-female band headed for Florida. And I like Jack Lemmon. He's like, well, what, shave our legs? What are you talking about? Now, of course, I mean, I don't think that a lot of male heads would turn when we see, these ladies walk, these quote unquote ladies walk by. I don't think a lot of men would turn their heads to look, but, and of course they joke about that. Now, pretty much the reason why this was filmed in black and white, even though Billy Wilder had made color films in the 1950s, including The 7-Year Itch with Marilyn Monroe, which we'll talk about in a minute. The black and white was, of course, meant to obscure the makeup and the idea that these guys are dressed as women, and to make it a bit more believable. And also because of the time period. I mean, all the films made in the early 20s and early 30s were black and white films, and we didn't really see a full color production. Well, actually, the first color production, which was a 2-strip Technicolor movie in 1929, here again in 1929, which was Rio Rita. And of course, here's the immortal Marilyn Monroe, who, despite the fact that we lost her at the age of 36 in 1962, she lives on. 67 years later, she still lives on as a major icon. Now, but the sad thing is that, as a lot of Marilyn Monroe fans know, is that during the production of Some Like It Hot, that her health was really starting to decline, because she had took a lot of barbiturates and other drugs, and she was having many affairs, including one with an actor in this movie who I will point out when we get to him. But she wasn't really doing well at this time, both physically and mentally. And the thing is that there's been a lot of talk about her behind the scenes. Tony Curtis, of course, infamously said that kissing her was like kissing Hitler. Although in interviews, Tony Curtis actually clarified that he actually said that working with Monroe was like, going down a steep mountain with some skis and then flying to the moon with wings. And then when he was asked to clarify that, that's when he said, well, what do you want me to say? That, kissing her was like kissing Hitler? I mean, so he didn't necessarily outright say, oh yeah, kissing her was like kissing Hitler. But he was trying to emphasize, of course, that working with her was very, very difficult and very frustrating, because, there were many moments in the movie where she would forget lines, and it would, a notorious number of takes. Although, to give Marilyn credit, to give Marilyn Monroe some credit, a lot of those takes were pushed by her handlers, and also her husband at the time, who was the playwright Arthur Miller. And here we meet Sweet Sue's band. Many of these ladies are unfortunately uncredited. However, we on the Criterion Blu-ray, we actually meet some of them in a featurette, including Marion Collier, who plays the clarinet. She plays Olga, the clarinet player, and she just passed away on September 3rd, 2021. So she passed away only 7 months ago. Laurie Mitchell, who played the trumpet, the character of Mary Lou. And, well, actually, the one just talking, who is the one just that plays the trombone, is actually Beverly Wills. And she got away with the joke about the one-legged jockey, which also went by the censors. A lot of people are still wondering how that managed to happen. But like I said, this movie really put a lot of cracks in that old time production code. and ushered in a new era of adult filmmaking in Hollywood. Although, to be perfectly honest, The Apartment, I think, would be almost the last, the final sledgehammer on the production code, because that dealt with, affairs and office politics and everything. These two films, Some Like It Hot and The Apartment, both written and directed by I.L. Diamond and Billy Wilder, they deserve a lot of credit for crushing the production code that had run rampant for nearly 30 years in Hollywood. Now, okay, I'm going to talk about Marilyn Monroe here for a bit, because the truth of the matter is I'm not a huge fan of Marilyn Monroe. The thing is that when I was growing up, there were two films that I saw constantly with Marilyn Monroe, and they were both directed by Billy Wilder. One was, of course, Some Like It Hot, and the other was The 7-Year Itch. And The 7-Year Itch was a movie based on a George Axelrod play, and it seems to be most famous now because of the subway, when the subway goes by and under the ground, and the air comes up and billows her dress and everything. Even though we don't see anything because of that, that was actually in the movie, that was actually a reshoot, because the first time they shot it, there were so many spectators, and so they had to go back out unannounced and actually get through and do it. But the thing about Marilyn Monroe is, of course, she had large crowd follower wherever she went. She was heavily scrutinized by the media, and it seemed like everywhere she turned, she didn't get like 1 ounce of privacy. And of course, she, a lot of times she would stay in her trailer and not want to come out, and she was late many times to the set. And she had to deal with a massive amount of publicity and scrutiny all throughout the decade of the 1950s. She became Marilyn Monroe in the late 1940s, and eventually she starred in the she didn't star in it. Actually, it was Bette Davis, but she had a small role in All About Eve, the famous 1950 film with Bette Davis and Ann Baxter and George Sanders. And then she eventually went to 20th Century Fox, where she worked on a number of films, including How to Marry a Millionaire and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Now, I saw originally in the Marilyn Monroe here, originally the actress who was going to play Sugar Cane was Mitzi Gainer. And Mitzi Gainer, she only made 13 or 14 films in the 1950s. She started out in a Betty Grable movie in 1950 called My Blue Heaven, and she was a dancer and a musical star. And eventually she was in the 1958 movie South Pacific, based on the Rodgers and Hammerstein film, which became the #1 box office hit of the year. Although what's interesting is that Mitzi Gainer and Marilyn Monroe were both in 2 films together when they were at Fox. In 1952, we had an anthology film called We're Not Married, which featured a bunch of couples that were married, but due to a technicality, they were informed that, well, you're not really married anymore. And it showcases all these vignettes and the reactions to their marriages being annulled, basically. And Marilyn Monroe was in the second segment, where she was married to David Wayne, who later played the Mad Hatter on Batman, the Batman series. But he was also in My Blue Heaven. And in that, and We're Not Married, she of course was a model, and she just won like the Miss Mississippi pageant or whatever. And We're Not Married is not a great film. It's got a huge cast, including Mitzi Gainer and Marilyn Monroe, but not a lot of them stand out in that movie. And but later in 1954, Mitzi Gainer would play the daughter of Ethel Merman. And Ethel Merman had been a massive Broadway stage actress and singer. And in 1954, they made a movie together called There's No Business Like Show Business. And Fox was very upset with Marilyn Monroe at that point because apparently, I'm trying to remember, I think that she actually, went off on her own for a while and didn't tell the studio. Of course, you got to remember that a lot of actresses were under contracts at that time. But, and they essentially wanted to punish her by shoehorning her into this movie in 1954 called There's No Business Like Show Business, starring Ethel Merman with Mitzi Gainer as her daughter and Donald O'Connor, famous from Singing in the Rain, as the son. Well, and it was supposed to showcase the family going through a bunch of struggles as they become Broadway stars. But the second half of the movie, Marilyn Monroe practically hijacks the picture. I mean, the thing is that when she's introduced about halfway through There's No Business Like Show Business, I mean, the attention of the movie almost goes completely to her, and she becomes this massive distraction. In some good ways, but in some other ways not. And I don't blame Marilyn Monroe for that. I really don't. But the thing is that it took the attention away from this family. And the second half of that movie is basically Donald O'Connor all hung up on the fact that he may lose Marilyn Monroe as his girlfriend. And it's kind of a disappointing musical. I mean, even though there's a lot of great musical numbers and, Fox went all out of budget and everything, it's actually kind of distracting how Marilyn Monroe is shoehorned into that movie, because it feels like all the attention suddenly goes to her when we don't even meet her until the movie's halfway over. So it's not so much anything that Marilyn Monroe does in that movie. It's just the way that she's used. But a year later, she would star in The 7-Year Itch, her first movie with Billy Wilder. And The 7-Year Itch is based on a George Axelrod play. Here again, pretty steamy for the 1950s, including this shot right here. She called me honey. But in 7-Year Itch, Tom Ewell plays a married guy living in New York City, and during the summer, like a lot of husbands, they have to stay in the city and work as they send their wives out in the country with the kids to get away from the summer heat. And in that movie, the wife is actually played by Carolyn Jones, who of course became famous years later for playing Morticia Addams on The Addams Family. And The 7-Year Itch, I mean, it does have funny moments, and it does have, some pretty cool. I mean, there's a great From Here to Eternity spoof where, Tom Ewell imagines himself in a number of different scenarios where just women are falling over head over heels in love with him. And they actually recreate the famous beach scene from Here to Eternity. But the thing is that 7-Year Itch, unfortunately, I think is a really dated movie now. A lot of stuff had to be toned down from the Broadway play by George Axelrod because, of course, it was about infidelity. And that was a movie that the production code really, really made a lot of objections on. And, of course, it's amazing because at the end of the decade, Some Like It Hot would start to crush the production code. Almost Billy Wilder's way of getting revenge, against the production code for that. But whenever I see The 7-Year Itch now, I can't help but ask the same question. Why the hell would Marilyn Monroe go for Tom Ewell? Because he's not a traditionally handsome leading man. He's certainly not really a movie star. And it's really baffling. And I think even a lot of moviegoers at the time were like, what is she see in this guy? That she would be willing to hang out with him and everything and possibly even have an affair. Now, of course, they don't have an affair. Nothing really happens. And, Tom Ewell uses every ounce of strength he can to not get with Marilyn Monroe. That being said, Marilyn Monroe is delightful in the movie. I mean, she really sells her movie star charm and her innocence in that movie. I mean, especially in color. Oh man, she's just amazing to look at in color in that movie. And then in 1956, she would of course star in Bus Stop, where she got her first seriously critical evaluations as being a woman that who can actually act in it, and that it's not all about looks with her. But unfortunately, in the 1950s, in the late 1950s, of course, she started getting addicted to barbiturates, and eventually it would destroy her health and her sanity because of all the media scrutiny that she was getting. I mean, every man in the country wanted Marilyn Monroe, but the funny thing is that she did not get hate from women film goers. They actually looked at her as they actually really liked Marilyn Monroe. I mean, it was really hard to find someone in the 50s who did not like Marilyn Monroe. I mean, it was pretty. I mean, there would have to be somebody that would be a real a-hole not to like Marilyn Monroe on the screen, because, I mean, with every picture she made, you know, she sold her persona of the innocent ingenue. And of course, here, you know, this is a wonderful little scene where she climbs up in Jack Lemmon's bunk, you know, starts rubbing his feet and everything, and he probably is getting hot and bothered by this time, and so he suggests, you know what, let's get out the whiskey, let's have fun, let's have a little party here, and he's going to steal the whiskey out of the bag. But of course, the hilarious thing about this whole sequence here, again, this is set during Prohibition, where alcohol was very, very much illegal, and you know, as soon as all the other band members of the Sweet Sue syncopators, yeah, I always screw that up, so never mind. But as soon as they all find out that they're having a party, they just grab their bottles and all their food and the salami and the crackers and everything, and they all get into this bunk to party with Jack Lemmon and Marilyn Monroe. And let's see here. Give me 1 second here. I just need to double check name. Okay. Now, like I said, a lot of the Sweet Sue orchestra are uncredited in this movie, and one I'm going to point out here in a minute actually became a fairly recognizable star on television. Dolores is actually one of the ones that has probably the most dialogue out of all the other orchestra members, but she's about to get in touch with Rosella. Not this one, but she's coming in right here in a second. Okay, here's Rosella popping out right there. That actress, her name is Grace Lee Whitney, and Star Trek fans will know her as Ensign. As Yeoman Janice Rand on Star Trek, and in fact, in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, she would come back as an ensign, and then she would also appear in Star Trek 4, 5, and 6, and Voyager, and New Voyages, and Of Gods and Men. So she was primarily known to a lot of people as Janice Rand on Star Trek. And in fact, I wanted to say real quick that, yeah, I mean, she's all, Grace Lee Whitney is right here on the left here. And I wanted to say that on the Paramount Plus channel, for those of you who are interested, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the director's edition, which was done by Robert Wise in 2001, where all the effects were improved and deleted footage was put back in. She is in that. Grace Lee Whitney is in that as Janice Rand. And finally, after many years of fans demanding for the director's edition of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, that'll be available on Paramount Plus this Tuesday. You know, all new improved effects, remastered in 4K. It's something that Star Trek fans don't want to miss. But it's pretty amazing that, this is only her third film and she's uncredited. Again, she's all the way on the left. She's all the way on the left of the screen, Grace Lee Whitney. Now, of course, Marilyn wears some pretty provocative costumes in this movie. And, of course, the costume designer was, of course, Ori Kelly, who won an Oscar for this film. This was the only Oscar that Some Like It Hot won. And even though it wasn't nominated for Best Picture, but it was nominated for Best Director, Best Screenplay, and a few other awards. But the only one that it won that year was for the costumes by Ori Kelly. In 1959, unfortunately, the movie that kind of dominated the Oscars and the other awards ceremonies was William Wyler's Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston. But of course, Ori Kelly, he would win 3 Oscars over the course of his career. Ori Kelly was born in Australia on the Isle of Man, and Ori was evidently the name of a king. And he moved to Hollywood in the early 1930s, and he worked on the Paul Muni film I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. Of course, I mentioned Paul Muni earlier because he's the star of Scarface, which also has George Raft in it. And he also did, 42nd Street. And he would also do a trio of William Wyler films. Here again, I just mentioned William Wyler because, he practically swept the Oscars in 1959 for Ben-Hur. But Ori Kelly would work on 3 key William Wyler films from the late 30s and early 40s. And they included the Bette Davis film Jezebel, which a lot of people think is a precursor to Gone with the Wind, but it really isn't. Great movie. And he also did The Letter, also with Bette Davis. And finally, The Little Foxes. And all three of these films, Jezebel, The Letter, and The Little Foxes, were all directed by William Wyler and starred Bette Davis. But the costumes in all 3 of these films were done by Ori Kelly. And in the 1950s, Ori Kelly did movies like Pat and Mike with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, Oklahoma, Gypsy, Sweet Bird of Youth. And one of his last films was, I forgot to mention that he also did the costumes for another film I lucky to own on Blu-ray, Mystery of the Wax Museum with Fay Wray from 1933. And then the other 2 Oscars he won was for the 1951 Best Picture winner, An American in Paris with Gene Kelly. And he also won for Les Girls with Mitzi Gainer, Gene Kelly, and Kay Kendall. And this movie came out in 1957. So it would have been interesting had Mitzi Gainer gotten the Marilyn Monroe role as Sugarcane, that she would have worked with the costume designer Ori Kelly again after this movie in 1957. And by the way, this is my favorite of all of Mitzi Gainer's movies, my absolute favorite. And I'm glad I own it on Blu-ray so I can see it again and again. I usually watch it around the holidays. I usually pop it in sometime around the holidays. And Grace Lee Whitney gets the idea to put ice down Jack Lemmon's neck here. Oh, she's really going into him. She's really going into it. Now, and they start torturing poor old Jack Lemmon, tickling him and everything. And of course, he takes Tony Curtis's advice and pulls that emergency brake, and they all come toppling out. Now, some of the costumes that Ori Kelly did and Some Like It Hot, I'll talk about them later when they come up. But I should mention that I should provide some more information pretty soon on Dave Barry and Joan Charlie, who play Sweet Sue and Beanstalk, because they're only going to be in a few more scenes. But the next person that we should talk about is, of course, the millionaire Osgood Feeling the Third. Here he is sitting right here at the very, very end, right next to the audience, and that is the legendary comedian Joe E. Brown. And he started out in late 1928. He went to Warner Brothers in 1929. See, here again, as I said, a lot of these old-time actors started out in the late 20s. And it's pretty amazing because I think that a lot of people that went to see Some Like It Hot in the theaters, and remember, this movie made like $50 million in 1959. That is staggering. It didn't make as much as Ben-Hur, but that's still a staggering amount. But here again, like Joey Brown, a lot of these actors started out in the 50s. And Tony Curtis is saying right here, more millionaires you could shake a stick at. And, brought up none of them are probably a day under 75. Joey Brown at this time was 67. And I always noticed, even as a kid, that he wasn't quite as old as all the other millionaires in that row of chairs. But Joey Brown, he only has 9 minutes of screen time, but man, does he make the most of that 9 minutes. I mean, he is a delight in this movie. And like I said, he started out at Warner Brothers in 1929, massive baseball fanatic. And he did dozens of movies. I mean, in the 30s and the 40s. In the 50s, his star power waned quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I mean, the only other movie I've seen Joe E. Brown in was he was in the 1935 adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And he played Flute, the bellows mender. And it's got an interesting connection to Some Like It Hot because essentially he basically is in drag opposite James Cagney. James Cagney is, of course, Bottom, who becomes an ass later on. But of course, in the play within a play, he has to romance Joe E. Brown in drag. And so, I mean, it's a very interesting connection. Very, very interesting connection that Joe E. Brown would play the bellows mender Flute in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where a lot of time he's in drag and he has to be romanced by James Cagney, who we mentioned already many, many times before. There's going to be a Public Enemy reference later. But Joey Brown just sparkles in this movie. I mean, he's just as memorable as Marilyn and Tony and Jack, even though he only has 9 minutes of screen time. And of course, as we will eventually discover, he gives the movie's very, very, very famous final line, probably the most famous final line in film history. But here he's going to do a little sexual harassment here by pinching Jack Lemmon's ass in the elevator. I love what Jack Lemmon told Beanstalk earlier, that, men are just rough, hairy beasts with 8 hands, and they only want one thing from a girl. You know what? He ain't wrong. He's not wrong, particularly for 1959. Now, Dave Barry, who plays Beanstalk here, I need to talk about him for a little bit because he was famous for developing a lot of accents and dialects and different offbeat sounds, and thus he got a lot of voice work, particularly in the Warner Brothers cartoon division, the Merry Melodies and everything. In fact, Dave Barry is very famous for voicing Humphrey Bogart in a series of Bugs Bunny cartoons, such as Bacall to Arms in 1946, obviously a reference to Lauren Bacall, Slick Hair in 1947, and 8-Ball Bunny in 1950. And he would play Humphrey Bogart and in those films. You probably have seen Slick Hair, which I believe is the Bugs Bunny short where he's in a restaurant and he basically tells Bugs, who's the waiter, that he wants that he wants rabbit. He wants to eat rabbit, and he's not going to. And if he has to get violent to get some rabbit, I mean, he, it's wonderful. And of course he. I want to before I go back to Dave Barry, I want to mention that I love this guy that plays the bellhop, the bellboy who hits on Tony Curtis in drag here. Unfortunately, like the character of Nellie earlier, played by Barbara Drew, he's one of the only actors that I was unable to find any information on whatsoever. But he's played by a guy named Al Brenneman. And I was actually wondering if this guy was still alive, but in reality, there's only 2 cast members that are still alive, and we will get to them when we see them. Or actually, one of them we may not see again, but one of them who has some serious lines of dialogue, he is still with us today at the age of 102. So when we get to that, we'll mention that. I just got pinched in the elevator. Now you know how the other half lives. Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. In a lot of these cross-dressing movies like Tootsie and Yentl and, Just One of the Guys, one of my personal favorites, they always learn how the opposite sex lives and what they have to deal with as they do what they have to do. I mean, whatever reason they are in drag, I mean, whether it's divorced from your ex-wife and he wants to see his kids like Mrs. Doubtfire, or Just One of the Guys where due to sexism passed up for a journalism competition and disguising yourself as a boy and going to another school. I mean, a lot of these characters learn how the other half lives, how the opposite sex lives, and thus it feeds into their arc and their development. And most of the time they become better people because of that. I'm your fairy godmother, and I'm going to keep an eye on you. That's a nice little connection to the Cinderella joke earlier. But one more thing I wanted to mention about Dave Barry, who plays Beanstalk here. Here he is one more time. In 1952, he did a radio show for Edgar Bergen. He was in the Edgar Bergen radio show in 1952. And specifically, he would do distinctive radio announcer voices for the Marilyn Monroe is Getting Married segment. Now, like I said, this was the same year that she made the Fox film We're Not Married. And the guy that played Beanstalk actually did these radio announcer voices for this Marilyn Monroe segment with both Edgar Bergen and his ventriloquist dummy, Charlie McCarthy. And he didn't do a lot of other films outside of Some Like It Hot, but he was in High Society as a pianist. He also played the piano, and he passed away in 2001 at the age of 82. Now, Tony Curtis obviously has a different agenda here because, Marilyn has now become the woman that he desires. And so what is he going to do? He can't romance her in drag. So what he's going to do, he just stole Beanstalk's suitcase with all his clothes in it, as well as his glasses. And he's going to pretend to be a millionaire and eventually romance Marilyn Monroe. And it kind of makes sense that they would eventually come together as a couple because, they're both basically lying to each other. They're both pretending to be somebody else. I mean, she's a gold digger and he's donning another costume just to romance her and lie about being a millionaire. So they're kind of right for each other in that respect. What do you think you're doing? Just a little trick. I picked up the elevator. It's like, now, I mean, I'm wondering if, because they said, we have to get bathing suits down at the bathhouse and everything. I'm pretty sure they actually went to the bathhouse. Now, look, how Jack Lemmon got through all that without being discovered by anybody else that he was a guy. Look, you're not supposed to ask that question, but, well, actually, I was wondering how the hell he kept his wig on, but of course they have all these bathing caps. And so that's a very convenient way for him to, keep his wig on and everything. Because you would think, well, if he actually went in the water with the wig on, he would lose the wig. I mean, Some Like It Hot, I don't know if I would call it a perfect comedy. I mean, the thing is, of course, like a lot of comedies, there's a lot of contrivances, there's a lot of coincidences, and you just have to go with it as, all these characters converge in Miami, Florida, and they lie to each other. Just to romance each other. Osgood Feeling, of course, romancing Jack Lemmon's character in drag, and Tony Curtis pretending to be a millionaire and romancing Marilyn Monroe. But of course, I, Tony Curtis is basically flying by the seat of his pants here because, he doesn't have a yacht. He doesn't have anything. And it just seems like it was pure luck that all these things managed to work out in his favor so he can take Marilyn Monroe, take her out and everything. Now, while Billy Wilder did complain about Marilyn Monroe's screwing up on takes and having to do, many scenes over and over again because of doing dozens and dozens of takes, this scene right here, there was 3 days scheduled to shoot, and she nailed every line of dialogue the first time. So she had her good days, but she also had her rough days. And I mean, here again, she's totally charming in this movie. But the reason why I was saying earlier that I'm not the biggest Marilyn Monroe fan is just because, I don't love a lot of her films. I mean, look, I'm willing to give her credit for like Bus Stop and, 7-Year Itch, and of course, Some Like It Hot. And you know what? I'll even throw Gentlemen Prefer Blondes in there. But it's the mystique of Marilyn that has lived on after all this time. And the thing is, I mean, even though she is irresistible on screen for the most part, I mean, the truth is she's not one of my favorite actresses. And the thing is, there are dozens of other actresses, including Mitzi Gainer, who I was talking about before, that probably could have pulled this role off just as much, if not better. And that's the thing. Mitzi Gainer was going to play Sugarcane until Marilyn Monroe said that she was interested, even though she knew she was going to play another stereotypical dumb blonde. But I mean, there's many, many other actresses from the 1950s that I prefer. I mean, Deborah Kerr from Here to Eternity. Marilyn Monroe is just not in my top 5 when it comes to 1950s actresses. But here again, look, I mean, she's become an icon, and I don't think her star stature will ever fade. I mean, it's interesting because her death made her life much more noticeable for 21st century audiences than anything else that she probably did in her career. I mean, of course, in Some Like It Hot, she's famous for the clothes she wears and the dialogue and everything. 7-Year Itch, there's the subway scene. But I mean, the thing is, I mean, will she be known 100 years from now? Yeah, she probably will be. But here again, I mean, and we should celebrate her life rather than her death, because her death, I mean, she only died 3 years after this movie under very mysterious circumstances. I mean, of course, we know for a fact that she had an affair with John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. Whether they were connected to her death, we'll never, ever know. We don't know if the mob was involved or, anybody in the government. I mean, unfortunately, we'll never, ever know. And here again, I mean, the thing is, I mean, the way the press and the public treated her during her lifetime, I certainly have a lot of empathy for her. And yet at the same time, I don't have a poster of her on my wall. But, on Twitter, I mean, we have lots and lots of images of Marilyn Monroe to enjoy. But, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I only like a handful of movies that she's in, unfortunately. And, she's the most recognizable star of the 1950s, but she's not my favorite. She's just not my favorite. His yacht, it sleeps 12. That makes me think of, well, actually, I should comment on this real quick, because when she says Vassar and Bryn Mawr, those are two of the all-female colleges that are part of the Sister Seven, I believe, or the seven sister colleges, basically. And there's this great gag about this Bryn Mawr girl that was strangled by her own brassiere. It's, but it makes sense that Marilyn Monroe's character would confuse Vassar and Bryn Mawr because they're both part of the seven sister colleges. In fact, Bryn Mawr was the very first women's college to provide PhDs for women that wanted to graduate with doctorates. And they also bring up the Sheboygan Conservatory of Music, which Sheboygan is in Wisconsin, but there is no Sheboygan Conservatory of Music. I think they're referring to the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music. Now, the hotel that they're staying at, and yes, Rob Gasper is absolutely right. This was filmed at the Hotel Del Coronado in San Diego. He says that he lives just 12 minutes from that hotel. That's pretty cool. That hotel has been utilized in numerous movies. Originally, that was supposed to be the hotel that Christopher Reeve goes to in the 1980 film Somewhere in Time. But in reality, they actually found another hotel in Michigan, which to this day on Mechanic Island, that hotel in Michigan, on that island, they've had a Somewhere in Time convention every year since that movie came out. But originally they were supposed to go to the Hotel Del Coronado in San Diego. Now, eventually in 1980, and maybe because the reason why they didn't shoot there is because I think another film production was already making a movie there, The Stuntman with Peter O'Toole. And also My Blue Heaven with Steve Martin and Rick Moranis was also filmed at that hotel. So it's been utilized in a number of movies since then. It's one of the most famous hotels in the United States. Time for some more water, excuse me. Oh, the old shell game? Jack Lemmon is a riot in this movie. I mean, he's just an absolute riot. And, he said in many interviews that when he first read the script that he fell off the couch laughing. He'd never read a script like this in his life. And, his role is just dynamite. It's just absolute dynamite. Now, you can see the towel on there. It says the Seminole Ritz Hotel. And this is all supposed to be in Miami, of course. As a kid, I just ate all this up. I really ate all this up. And I understood everything that was going on. I understood, okay, for some reason they can't drink alcohol. It's illegal. You can't do that. It's a bad thing. I understood, why they cross-dressed. I understood why they were going to Miami with this female band. I understood all of this. And that's part of the reason why, as a kid, I was particularly drawn to this movie. Now, Tony Curtis's voice is actually dubbed much of the time, but of course, when he slips his real voice in there, it's always funny. Now, this bit with Joey Brown has one of my favorite lines in the whole movie, where he says, he says his yacht is the new Catalonia. And he said the old Catalonia died off a wild party off Cape Hatteras. That's one of my favorite lines in this movie. I just, and Joey Brown, Caledonia, excuse me. The old Caledonia went down during a wild party off Cape Hatteras. That's like, really? And, on the commentary on the Criterion Blu-ray, he did question why Joey Brown's laugh is very, very similar to Jack Lemmon's. Well, I think I have an answer to that. I think I have a theory because, there's a few times that Jack Lemmon laughs and he questions, what is he laughing for? Like earlier, there's a scene on the train where where Jack Lemmon says he'll take a rain check on taking a swig of bourbon. And he just laughs, and he questions on the commentary, why does he laugh like that? Well, here's the thing. Jack Lemmon's laugh and Joey Brown's laugh are so similar that I'm just beginning to think, was this the writer's way of saying that they would be a perfect couple? I mean, and that's the thing. They don't go outright and say if they actually do get married or if they end up a couple at the end of the movie. But I mean, it's hinted at just enough. And maybe the laughter is what the key is to where Jack Lemmon eventually and Joey Brown eventually do become a couple. But who knows? We don't have any substantial evidence of that. I mean, because it's a comedy. We're just having fun. But I mean, that's my theory. That's my theory is why their laughs are very, very similar. Marilyn Monroe has several musical numbers in this movie. One of them, which of course is much later near the end, which I actually very much adore. But now, and then of course, like I said, Ori Kelly won the Oscar for these costumes. That is essentially a see-through chiffon that she's wearing. And this, of course, is the dress that she goes out to the boat with Tony Curtis. And I took some notes down on this. The dress that she's wearing is made of a fabric that's no longer in use called souffle, although it's sort of patterned after souffle, I guess you could say. And on that dress are hundreds of gold and silver rhinestones. And the and like I said, I mean, we see a lot of Marilyn Monroe's skin through that dress, and this dress is essentially barely being held up. I mean, and of course it cuts like right above her bottom. So I mean, we see a lot. I mean, for a 1959 movie, we see a lot of Marilyn Monroe as she's wearing this dress. I'm not going to get caught in a miniature sand trap with that guy. Jack Lemmon has like all the great lines in this movie. Him and Joey Brown, they have like all the funniest lines. Here again, I love this bellboy. He just won't stop hitting on Tony Curtis. It's great. Never mind leaving your door open. I got a pass key. It's like, what the hell? I mean, I guess the writers were like, well, if we're going to have a guy hit on Jack Lemmon, we might as well have somebody hit on Tony Curtis, and it's just this bellboy. Great stuff. Yeah, like I said, those are hundreds of gold and silver rhinestones all over that dress. And of course, I mean, they mentioned on the featurette on the Blu-ray that, in reality, her character wouldn't afford these type of dresses, but whatever. It's Hollywood. Just go with it. Just go with it. Okay. You know how these millionaires are. Now, I mean, one thing that I got to confess, one of the few nitpicks I have about Some Like It Hot, there are a few times, especially when I was growing up, where certain lines would sound different and I would misinterpret them. And one of them is right here in this scene where she says, "My mother could see me now." And Jack Lemmon says, "I hope my mother never finds out." When I was growing up, I thought he said, "I hope my mother never flies south." which probably could have a line that probably could have worked just as well. But I actually thought that he said, "I hope my mother never flies south, like to Miami, Florida." You know, that's a really show-offy dress right there. I mean, it's a really sexy dress, really, really sexy. Damn. Of course, Beanstalk is mesmerized. I don't know what Beanstalk's deal is. I mean, because, you know, I don't know. I mean, he's a minor character. I'm not going to get hung up on it. I mean, but I've always wondered, I mean, does he have like affairs with any of these band members, or is he just, is he just like, just the manager and he just like reads the paper when he's not needed? I don't know. But anyway. So this scene, of course, is very funny because we noticed, well, even in 1959, I think audiences were gasping because like, oh no, he forgot the earrings. And of course, there's a flip to that because later on, Jack Lemmon is going to forget to remove a particular piece of clothing when they get identified by the gangsters. But and here, of course, we discover how the hell he got back up to that hotel room after Jack Lemmon and Marilyn Monroe ran from the beach. And that looks like a very expensive stole. It really does. I like the striped socks. Well, I'll be. He does have a bicycle. That's all he had to say was he's seasick. It's like, no, I can't go out on the yacht. I'm seasick. I'll just throw up, Now, Billy Wilder, of course, he became famous in 1945 for directing The Lost Weekend. The year before that, he directed the legendary classic Double Indemnity, Double Indemnity with Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck, which if I'm not mistaken, that's the movie that put him on the map. I mean, he had done other movies like Ninotchka with Greta Garbo and everything, but it was really Double Indemnity that put him on the map. And then in 1945, he won the Oscar for Best Director and Best Picture for The Lost Weekend with Ray Milland, which I talked about in my Frogs commentary about a month ago, because in that movie, I mean, when Ray Milland takes a swig of alcohol near the end as the frogs are attacking his Florida estate. Oh, it's also set in Florida, so there you go. As they're attacking his house, it's like he's taking a drink, and I said, oh my God, it's The Lost Weekend all over again. But Billy Wilder, of course, he would later on do Sunset Boulevard in 1951 with Gloria Swanson, which is now considered one of the great Hollywood movies about Hollywood, with also a very classic line to cap off the movie where Gloria Swanson goes into the camera and says, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille." And then, of course, he would do Witness for the Prosecution, 7-Year Itch. And Some Like It Hot was a massive, massive hit. Although critically speaking, it got mixed reviews. Ironically, I mean, Tony Curtis was, of course, married to Janet Leigh at the time. And their daughter, of course, is Jamie Lee Curtis, who went on and starred in Halloween and Trading Places and many other films. The year after this, his wife, Janet Leigh, would make Psycho, which is also a classic film from that era. And there was that bit earlier where Marilyn Monroe tells Jack Lemmon, "Oh yeah, the yacht, it sleeps 12." Well, it makes me think of the Bates Hotel, which also sleeps 12. So I don't think that was intentional because, like I said, Psycho came out a year later. But in 1960, I mean, my two favorite films of 1960, hands down, are Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which starred Janet Leigh, of course, and Anthony Perkins. But Billy Wilder's The Apartment, and this is a limited edition from Arrow Video of The Apartment. This is one of those movies that I think is just absolutely perfect. Jack Lemmon works with Billy Wilder again. He would work with him for 6 other movies, including The Fortune Cookie and Buddy Buddy and The Front Page. And but this film, I think, is absolutely perfect. It's got Shirley MacLaine and Fred McMurray. And here again, this was another film that really, really crushed the production code at the time. And I think it's an absolute masterpiece. I mean, I watch it practically every year. Once a year, I pop in The Apartment. And the gentleman who did the music score for Some Like It Hot also returned for this film, Adolf Deutsch. And the music in The Apartment is just, it's honey and sugar to my ears. I mean, I adore that music score from The Apartment. And, you know, the funny thing is that was one of his last films before he retired in 1961. This herring joke. If you know, herrings are tiny fishes, and I mean, she's so dumb that she has no idea. But of course, he tries to emphasize the reasoning because they shrink when they're marinated. Down the hatch, as we say at sea. Now, of course, this is the one of the infamous sequences where they would do dozens and dozens of takes, so much that it really upset Tony Curtis, even though he was kissing Marilyn Monroe the entire time. I mean, think about that. That's the great irony that, any man would probably kill to have as many takes as possible killing Marilyn Monroe. But no, he was like, no, this was a chore, man. This was, this wasn't all that fun. And here again, without dumping on Marilyn, because here again, she was going through a lot of issues. Her health was deteriorating at this point, or starting to, and that's the thing, is that even Billy Wilder said later, despite the fact that she was difficult to work with all these takes and everything, that she still was a fabulous woman to work with and be with. And she eventually won the Golden Globe for this movie for Best Actress, which I think was well deserved. I mean, even though there's another scene later when we get to it where, they had to do like the same line over 50 times because she kept on shifting the words out of order and just couldn't get it right. She just couldn't get it right. The first of many, many kisses between Tony Curtis and I love on the Blu-ray special features where Deborah Noodleman, who she's a costume designer. She is the wife of John Landis, and she among other films, she actually designed Indiana Jones's costume with the fedora and the whip and everything. And she does this brand new feature for the Criterion version, where she talks about not only the costumes that Marilyn Monroe wears, courtesy of Ori Kelly, but also emphasizes the fact that, look, I mean, her character, she's not a bad girl. She's actually a very innocent girl. I mean, she sells kisses for the milk fund. That's not on the same level of like a hooker or something like that. But I think this might be a perfect time to mention what all is on this Criterion Blu-ray, because I highly recommend, if you don't have a 4K player, if you do have a 4K player, get the Kino Lorber 4K Blu-ray that literally just came out a month ago. But if you want to pick this up, it's got a new 4K digital restoration with uncompressed monaural soundtrack, audio commentary from 1989 featuring film scholar Harold Suber, new short program on Ori Kelly's costumes for the film, featuring costume designer and historian Deborah Noodleman Landis, and costume historian and archivist Larry McQueen. There is also 3 behind-the-scenes documentaries which were produced in the 1990s, appearances by Billy Wilder on the Dick Cavett Show from 1982, conversation from 2001 between actor Tony Curtis and film critic Leonard Walton, a French television interview from 1988 with actor Jack Lemmon, a radio interview from 1955 with Marilyn Monroe, a trailer, and then finally an essay, an insert essay by author Sam Wasson. And like I said, I got this for $23 off of Amazon. So if you love this movie, I mean, I would highly recommend you get the Criterion. Lovely shot of Marilyn Monroe right there. And of course, we have an essay in here. Yeah, the essay is called How to Have Fun by Sam Wasson. And it's, there's some production photos here on the back. Really, really lovely. If I had a 4K player, trust me, I would have gotten that Kino Lorber 4K from just a month ago, but unfortunately I don't. Because apparently that Blu-ray commissioned all new bonus features. So now, going back to Billy Wilder just for one moment, I want to mention that I will be doing a commentary probably eventually this year, later on this year, on what I think is Billy Wilder's most underrated and underseen movie. And that would be a movie in 1961 called 1, 2, 3, starring James Cagney, who, of course, we've mentioned several times already in this commentary. James Cagney, this was the role that basically exhausted him to the point where he retired for 20 years. And he would not appear in another movie until 1981, Ragtime. But 1, 2, 3, it's set in Germany, literally right before the Berlin Wall came up. And James Cagney plays a Coca-Cola executive. He's working in West Berlin. He's married. He has a couple of children. He has a very, very sexy blonde secretary that he has numerous flings with. And he gets a call from his boss saying that, okay, I want you to take care of my 18-year-old daughter who is coming to visit for a while. And of course, James Cagney, he was about to have this, his wife was about to go on vacation herself, and he was going to spend like the next 6 weeks with his secretary in a hotel room, basically. And so the 18-year-old daughter shows up, and she has this wild reputation. Like, she tends to get engaged like the next day and everything. She was engaged to a pimple-faced basketball player. And that's part of the reason why her father sent her out to Germany to stay with James Cagney and his family and to look after her for a while, so that, first of all, she can grab some international education, but also just so she can get out of Georgia and calm down a bit. But here's what happens. And like I said, if you haven't seen 1, 2, 3, I'm going to give very little of the plot away, but it needs to be said. The daughter visits James Cagney, and after 6 weeks of living with James Cagney in West Berlin, she completely disappears. She completely disappears. The family has no idea where she is. Her name is Scarlett, so the wife, of course, jokingly says, I don't know what happened to her. She just gone with the wind, Well, apparently she snuck behind the Iron Curtain and secretly wed a communist. And so when she comes back to visit James Cagney, she's just basically like, yeah, me and my husband were going to fly out to Russia and shoot missiles, because he's studying to be a missile scientist. Yeah, he actually says, Soviet missiles, psst, Venus. American missiles, psst, psst, Miami Beach. And it's a total hilarious satire about capitalism versus communism. And I am absolutely convinced, because 1, 2, 3 was not a hit. It was not a hit in the same league as Some Like It Hot or The Apartment. But what happened was, in the mid-1980s, audiences began to rediscover it. And what happened was that it became a massive hit on German television. And I am absolutely convinced. It's not just a theory, but I am convinced it's because of 1, 2, 3 of making German audiences laugh on both sides. That's the movie that inspired the Berlin Wall to come down. I am absolutely convinced that was one of the reasons why the Berlin Wall eventually came out, was this little known movie that Billy Wilder made in 1961 called 1, 2, 3, which he also wrote with I.A.L. Diamond. And that's why I encourage all of you. I mean, Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, and 1, 2, 3, I consider three consecutive masterpieces, and they're all hilarious. I mean, The Apartment does have a bit more dramatic elements in it, but oh man, they're all three masterful comedies. And 1, 2, 3 in particular, because it's a satire, and like there are just lines galore in that movie which are hilarious as hell. I mean, absolutely hilarious. Now, this scene right here where Jack Lemmon and Joey Brown were dancing, I mean, it's over now. But that scene was utilized in Children of Lesser God, the movie starring William Hurt and Marlee Matlin, which I'm a huge fan of. And I did a commentary for that last year. And we just lost William Hurt, sadly. I mean, he just passed away only last month. And Marlee Matlin, of course, co-starred in the movie Coda, which just won Best Picture. So, I mean, if you haven't seen Children of Lesser God yet, go watch that sometime. And then if you want, listen to my commentary on it, because I'm still shocked I did that commentary literally only 6 months before William Hurt's passing. And Marlee Matlin, of course, back at the Academy Awards ceremony, where the film that she did about deaf students actually won Best Picture, which is Coda. And I still have to see Coda. I admit I'm a little overdue watching Coda. I need to watch it. But how much do I owe the Milk Fund so far? $850,000. Let's just make an even million. I don't have the money, but you know, I'm sure. Yeah, millionaires would make massive donations to the Milk Fund just to kiss Marilyn Monroe. I'm pretty sure. I love this little line right here, which isn't played for laughs, but I love how she says, I forgot to give you a receipt. I mean, that's a sweet moment. That is very, very sweet. And of course, you know, I mean, Tony Curtis being one of these saxophone players that usually, leaves her in a room alone with a squeezed out tube of toothpaste and the fuzzy end of the lollipop. He actually does generate genuine feelings for her. And of course, now we get to one of the funniest scenes in the entire movie. It's 2 pages of dialogue, and every line is brilliant. Jack Lemmon is, of course, celebrating here on the bed, still in drag, mind you. He hasn't taken anything off yet. And who knows how long he's been, lying on this bed, kind of celebrating. Where he just got proposed by Joe E. Brown, and he's actually going to marry him. We're planning a June wedding. Well, this is another one of my favorite lines. I mean, there's a lot of great lines in this movie, but like, he keeps marrying girls all the time. But you're not a girl, you're a guy. And why would a guy want to marry a guy? Security. Of course. Of course, security. Now, I love the irony of Tony Curtis telling him that, or Jack Lemmon telling Tony Curtis that, of course, he's been married like 7 or 8 times and her mother's keeps tabs on that. Tony Curtis, after he divorced Janet Leigh in 1961, would actually go on to marry 5 more times. Jack Lemmon, on the other hand, after he got married to, I forget her first name. I know her last name was Farr, but they married in, I think, 62, and they remained married until his death. I keep getting those alimony checks every month. It's like, you're nuts, man. You're absolutely nuts. And Tony Curtis is absolutely right. Like, what about your honeymoon? And I love how he completely dodges the whole obvious of that. Oh, yeah. I mean, you're going to he's going to discover you're a guy on your honeymoon. Well, no. We just been discussing the locations. He wants to go to the Riviera, but I'm leaning towards Niagara Falls. Jack Lemmon is dazzling here. Just dazzling. he's also great in The Apartment. I mean, he's also great in Billy Wilder's The Apartment. But I've said it before that my absolute favorite Jack Lemmon performance is in the 1979 movie The China Syndrome, where he waited 3 years to star in that movie. And that, of course, that movie, predicted like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima. Great film, and Jack Lemmon is brilliant, just brilliant in that movie. Okay, now, when she says it's me, sugar, that's one of those infamous moments where they went through the takes like, dozens and dozens of times, because she would keep screwing up this most simple of lines. She would say, sugar, it's me, or me, sugar, whatever. I mean, she could not get those 3 words right. But here again, I'm not trying to dump on Marilyn Monroe, because, she was going through a lot of issues at this time, psychologically and physically. She wasn't well. She just wasn't well when she did Some Like It Hot, and yet she barely got through it. I mean, she only made a couple more movies after this. She made Let's Make Love, and also her last film would, of course, be Clark Gable's last movie, which was The Misfits. And that bellboy, he just won't quit. He won't quit. What? Is he holding a bottle of Beefeater? Did you see the size of that bottle? Oh, my God. That was a huge bottle of Beefeater. Oh, God. All right. Now, the 2 gentlemen standing behind George Raft here, I'm going to have to talk about them while we're in the 3rd act here, or entering the 3rd act, where all the gangsters converge on Florida. Here again, massive coincidence, where they're going to a convention for the Friends of the Italian Opera. I can see Billy Wilder and I.L. Diamond just laughing their ass off writing this stuff. It's like, yeah, the biggest coincidence in the world. They would go to the Hotel Seminole Ritz in Miami at the same time that they're there. Now, this character, of course, is flipping the coin. Orders from Little Bonaparte. And we'll meet Little Bonaparte here in a minute. But here they are being searched and everything. Of course, the cop that was also in Chicago earlier, played by Pat O'Brien, he's down in Florida as well, because obviously he's been wanting to nab these guys for weeks now, ever since the St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago. It ain't loaded. My golf clubs, putter, nipplick, number 3 iron. My mashie. Even the detective found that funny. Now, okay, he flips the coin. He catches it. Where did you pick up that cheap trick? Well, he picked up that cheap trick from Scarface, because George Raft, his character in that movie, he flips a coin the entire time. So he got it exactly from George Raft in Scarface. and I think George Raft would spoof that a little, in other films later. Like he has a cameo in the James Bond movie Casino Royale from 1967, the spoof version, not the Daniel Craig version. And that one, he's just flipping a coin in the casino, I haven't been to a hotel convention ever since I was a kid, when I was in the Children of the American Revolution. I remember I wore those stupid delegate ribbons and everything. Don't worry, Spats. One of these days, we're going to dig up those 2 guys. Yeah, that's what you'll have to do. Dig them up. George Raft is awesome in this movie. I mean, he's just awesome. I mean, everybody is awesome, but I mean, I feel like such a tramp taking jewelry from this guy. Very, very 1920s appropriate costumes here, courtesy of Ori Kelly. Very reminiscent of the flappers of the era. And of course, Jack Lemmon discovers, oh my God, Joe, something tells me the omelet's about to hit the fan. Okay, now I need to talk about the other two gangsters that I pointed out earlier. Let's see here. And as I said before, only two of them have any significant dialogue, and they're both standing right next to Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon right here. Now, the one that's moving and talking to him right here, this is an actor named Mike Mazurski, and he had this face where he was typecast as brainless athletes and tough guys and thugs and gangsters, of course. And he actually started out in Dick Tracy, played this character named Splitface, as opposed to Scarface, in the original Dick Tracy film from 1945. But I mean, he did every movie that he did, that Mike Mazurki did in his career, he was uncredited. No joke. The majority of the movies he made were uncredited, usually as henchmen or whatever. And it wasn't until 1945 with Dick Tracy when he actually started getting credited roles. And he did, lots of other noir films. I mean, he was in Neptune's Daughter, Sinbad the Sailor, just to name a few, Night in the City, Blood Alley. He did a couple movies for Disney. He was in the Davy Crockett films in the mid-1950s. And let's see what... and then later on in his career, after Some Like It Hot, he would appear in like It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, The Magic of Lassie of all films. And one of the very last films that he did in his career was the 1990 version of Dick Tracy, directed by Warren Beatty for Walt Disney Productions. So he's pretty much the only actor to appear in the 1945 version of Dick Tracy and the 1990 version of Dick Tracy. But yeah, he had a pretty long and pretty cool career. And he was also a professional wrestler. That was the other thing I wanted to mention. He was also most famous for playing a professional wrestler, and he was a Ukrainian-American actor. Yeah, but he's pretty cool in this movie. Now, the other henchman, who I'll point him out when we see him again, but he had that very distinctive face and everything. His name is Harry Wilson. And like Mike Mazurki, a lot of roles he had were uncredited. And in fact, more so in Harry Wilson's case, because pretty much every single movie he made from 1928 to 1957. Yeah. Every movie he was in from 1928 to 1957, all uncredited. And, he's probably best known. He played the Winky Guard in The Wizard of Oz. Here again, uncredited. The first time he actually got credit for a movie was in 1957 when he played the female monster in Frankenstein's Daughter. Yeah. And then he did Some Like It Hot, where he actually got not only a pretty decent sized role, but he actually got full credit for it, thanks to Billy Wilder. And after Some Like It Hot, he did films like Ocean's 11. Here again, still uncredited. How the West Was Won, Irma la Douce, the Billy Wilder film from '63, which reunited Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon. And his last film was in 1965, The Great Race, The Money Trap, and The Cincinnati Kid. And The Greatest Story Ever Told, which, of course, is this religious movie about Jesus. But yeah, I mean, he made hundreds of films, all uncredited. Some Like It Hot is pretty much his only real substantial role that he did in his career. His distinctive facial features and voice, although they do not often led him to be cast as various henchmen, thugs, convicts, and brawlers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are the two henchmen working for Spats. And of course, Tony Curtis gives these diamonds, which really came from Osgood Fielding III, and just gave them to Marilyn Monroe. And like I said, the comedy kind of calms down a bit here, which, here again, Tony Curtis, his character actually develops genuine feelings for her. But he's kind of he's now in a serious pickle, and, he has no choice but to bail out with Jack Lemmon because, the gangsters are on their tail. And they're onto him on top of all that because in the elevator, they they kind of recognized him. They weren't 100% sure, but they kind of recognized him. I want to say hi to everybody in the chat again, Katrina and Rob Gasper. Anybody else that is hanging out, please let me know. I'll give you a shout out. But I'll go ahead and give a timestamp here real quick. I mean, we actually got through much of the movie here. I always give a timestamp when I run out of things to say, but I think I got through this movie quite a bit here. I mean, yeah, we're at 1 hour, 45 minutes. Approximately 1 hour, 45 minutes, and we have approximately 16 minutes left to go. So we're pretty much close to the end of the line here. But there's still one more actor that we need to talk about. Well, actually, a couple, and you'll be amazed that there's actually a player in this movie that is still with us, and he's 102 years old. 102 years old, and he's coming here very, very soon. Now, as a kid, I thought the place is crawling with monsters as opposed to mobsters. I don't know. I mean, as a kid, I kind of interpreted some of these lines differently, I think, than other people. But I still loved the movie as a kid, which is pretty amazing that I fell in love with this movie at that young an age. So, like I said, there in the middle is Mike Mazurki, and the one that just held his hands up is Harry Wilson. And like I said, both of them had, uncredited roles for years until Billy Wilder actually gave them some substantial roles here. And this is what they're probably most famous for. Little Bonaparte's getting soft. Now, we're going to meet little Bonaparte in a minute, but I'm just going to go ahead and say right now that little Bonaparte is he's actually a spoofy version of Little Caesar with Edward G. Robinson, another one of the most famous of all gangster movies from the 1930s. But we're also going to have a reference to The Public Enemy coming up here pretty soon. Like I said, I am convinced that when this movie came out in 1959, that a lot of the older audiences who watched those gangster movies from the 1920s and 30s just loved all the familiar faces and all the inside jokes. I mean, like I said, I already mentioned that George Raft became famous for flipping the coin always in the 1931 version of Scarface. Great little inside joke. The first thing we got to do is get out of these clothes. Yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, if you really want to nitpick, you could say like, well, I mean, if they're really in fear of their lives, why not just leave the hotel immediately and they can do their convention and, just bail out, just get out of there immediately. But, they have to figure out a clever way to escape from the hotel. I mean, they tried to get out just a minute ago. Now, like I said, this is a flip side to what happened earlier when Tony Curtis forgot he was wearing earrings. Well, in this bit, Jack Lemmon forgets that he's still wearing high heels. And that's what gives it away. The clopping of the heels. George Raft is like, those guys. Harry Wilson's face. It's so expressive. And here we have a couple of mini chase scenes in these last few minutes of the movie. He's still flipping the coin. He's still flipping the damn coin. And Jack Lemmon, as you can see, is still wearing those high heels. He had to run around during these chase scenes in those high heels, which is amazing. Uh-oh. Recognize those spats. Now, here we have a reference to the James Cagney movie. Here again, we're going back to James Cagney so many times. The famous grapefruit scene from The Public Enemy, where he smashes a grapefruit into Mae Clark's face. And Billy Wilder would spoof that again in 1, 2, 3 with James Cagney. And basically, he would when he was trying to change the communist husband into a capitalist, he's being so difficult and everything, and he picks up a grapefruit and says, "How would you like a little fruit for dessert?" Okay, now we have the actor that I was alluding to earlier. That is, he is still alive. This gentleman right here is still alive. Now, I'm trying to remember his name real quick. Okay. Nehemiah Pertsoff. This is Nehemiah Pertsoff. He was born on August 2nd, 1919. And yes, he is in fact still with us at the age of 102. His wife, who he was married to since 1951, Thea Pertsoff, just passed away last year. But Nehemiah is still with us at 102 years old. And aside from maybe a couple of Sweet Sue's band, including, I know there was one that was interviewed that's still with us, Sandra Warner. Now, okay, and this guy about to get into the cake, this is Edward G. Robinson Jr., the son of Edward G. Robinson, who of course was in Little Caesar. And Little Bonaparte is a spoof of Little Caesar. This character that Nehemiah Pertsoff plays is a virtual spoof of Little Caesar from the 1931 gangster film starring Edward G. Robinson. And the son, Edward G. Robinson Jr., is about to slaughter Spatz and his gang. And in fact, here's another thing. Even though Marilyn Monroe is nowhere to be found at this convention, and for obvious reasons, Edward G. Robinson Jr., who we're about to see jump out of the cake and slaughter these guys, he was having an affair with Marilyn Monroe pretty much at this exact same time. I don't know for sure if they were sleeping together while the movie was being made, but he was actually for a brief time, he was actually one of Marilyn Monroe's lovers. Isn't all this fascinating? And of course, sitting next to George Raft are the other two actors I mentioned before, Harry Wilson and Mike Mazurki. here again, I'm so glad that after so many decades of uncredited roles that they're finally given credit for this movie. I mean, I actually find that really rewarding because they absolutely deserve it. I mean, when they just play these bit parts, walk-ons, they would be hired just because they have these thuggish looks and everything. And so they could play either a thug or a gangster or somebody in the background. But finally, for once in their careers, they're given a showcase here with George Raft and Nehemiah Pertsoff, and it's wonderful. And here comes the cake. And of course, Spats. I love George Raft right here. He's like, wait a minute. What? It's not my birthday. What is going on here? This is not. And Edward G. Robinson Jr. pops out of the cake and massacres these guys. And wouldn't you know, Joe and Jerry are witnessing another gangland slaying. Big joke. All right, guys, time to go again. Let's get out of here. Nehemiah Pertsoff's like, hey, get those two guys. And he was just talking about them. He was literally just talking about them a few minutes ago. But of course, here we have Pat O'Brien finally closing out the story of these gangsters and everything. My compliments to the chef. Nobody leaves this room till I get the recipe. You want to make a federal case out of it? Yeah! So yeah, Nehemiah Pertsoff is Little Bonaparte, a spoof of Little Caesar, is still with us at 102 years old. Pretty amazing. And aside from one or two of Sweet Sue's band members, the only surviving member from this movie, literally. Guys are watching the railroads, the roads, and the airport. They won't get away. Oh, but they're not watching yachts. Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Now, as I said before, the music for this movie was done by Adolf Deutsch, with 4 songs performed by Marilyn Monroe, 2 songs performed by jazz artist Maddie Malnick. And here we have this climactic song, I'm Through with Love, sung by Marilyn Monroe. My favorite song in the movie. I mean, and here again, I mean, after 2 hours of pretty much almost constant laughter, we're finally settling down with this, this very, very sad, very melancholic song, just beautifully performed by Marilyn Monroe, and all the looks on Tony Curtis's face all throughout the scene says everything. It just says everything of what he is thinking, what he's feeling, and he feels horrible. He feels horrible that he has to leave this woman who he is genuinely falling in love for just to save his own skin. Yeah, I mean, you can tell from his face that his heart is literally breaking right now. What a way to nearly end this movie with this very, very moving song. Wow. Beautiful, just beautiful. Now, okay, I always question this because, okay, I mean, you're telling me that no other people screamed and noticed this at this moment. I mean, hell, you can see some of the band members noticing, but they're still playing their instruments. I mean, there should have been a bigger reaction to this. I mean, look, I mean, Sweet Sue yelling beanstalk is good enough, I guess, but I don't know. I wanted more reactions there. The girl in the middle there is stunned. And of course, this has happened many times in these cross-dressing movies where, one character kisses the other character and they still don't know. Tootsie had that. I mean, just one of the guys had that. I mean, all these movies have those tropes, but they all go back to Some Like It Hot. They all go back to Some Like It Hot, which here again, I mean, completely understandable why this is considered the #1 comedy of all time by the American Film Institute. And I highly doubt that's George Raft underneath the sheet there, but does it really matter? No, it doesn't really matter. I just wish there was a bit more reactions to that kiss. I wish there was a few more reactions to that, especially since that song is so beautiful and moving and tragic. I mean, especially in light of what would happen to Marilyn Monroe in just a few more years. I mean, in real life, she really did get the fuzzy end of the lollipop. And of course, Joey Brown is absolutely delighted that Daphne is coming with. She's so eager. And I always love this final shot with the camera that Billy Wilder does as we see, Marilyn Monroe come through on the bike and runs up the platform. Like I said, that's practically a see-through dress. That is very, very provocative for 1959. Very provocative. Now, of course, we come to the very, very famous and rightly so final scene in the movie where Tony Curtis very quickly confesses to her that I've been a liar and a phony and a fake pretty much this whole time, but and he actually tells her, forget about me, just go back to all the millionaires and everything. She won't have it. She won't have it at all. And Joey Brown's his smile just always kills me. He's got a great smile here. Now, the final line, which the only thing that really can be said about the final line is that even though it was originally written in the script to end with this line, it was always meant to be a placeholder. In other words, they put that line in, but they were always hoping to think of a better line, a more funnier line to end this movie. But the truth of the matter is that they eventually realized, no, this is the perfect line to end the movie. Absolutely. And you can interpret this however you want. I mean, it's a zany comedy. It's a farce. I mean, I don't think there was any serious inclination of bringing these two characters together, but you can interpret it however you want. And nobody's perfect. And that ends Some Like It Hot, the legendary 1959 comedy produced and directed and written by Billy Wilder with his screenwriting partner, I.A.L. Diamond. Oh, this was so much fun to do. And it's wonderful seeing this movie again after so many years. And like I said, I mean, if you have a 4K player, get the 4K that was recently released by Kino Lorber only a few months ago. But otherwise, this Blu-ray by Criterion, it's the way to go. It's the way to go. Oh, and by the way, there is a disclaimer at the end. It says restored by Park Circus in collaboration with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and the Criterion Collection. Restored in 4K from the 35mm original picture negative, 35mm duplicate picture negative, and 35mm fine grain master. 4K scans complete at Deluxe EFE Film Hollywood and Roundabout Entertainment, digital image restoration and audio restoration. And of course, all those other details are in this Criterion Blu-ray. Yes, Rob, absolutely. It's a total classic. Total classic. I mean, here again, I had a couple of tiny nitpicks, but look, how can you dislike this movie? I can't imagine anybody not laughing at Some Like It Hot, not having this much fun with it, because it truly is it's grand fun from begin to end, from first second to last second. It's just pure brilliance in terms of motion picture comedy. I want to thank Rob and Katrina for coming out tonight. Anybody else watching, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Just to let everybody know, I probably will not do a commentary next week because I will be going to Atlantic City for the New Jersey Horror Con and meeting some celebrities there and having some fun out for a while. My birthday's on Monday. I turned 43 years old. And then, like I said, that weekend I plan to go to Atlantic City, New Jersey. However, my next two commentaries, which I want to mention here real quick, will be just 1 second. Just 1 second here. On April 14th at 9 p.m., which is Thursday night, April 14th, I will be doing Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat, which is an X-rated animated feature from 1972 based on the R. Crumb Underground comic book. And yeah, so this is going to be a 50th anniversary commentary for Fritz the Cat. And then the Saturday right after that, I will be doing a 50th anniversary commentary for the Culpeper Cattle Company, which is a Western starring Gary Grimes and Bo Hopkins and Billy Greenbush. And that also came out in 1972. That will be a 50th anniversary commentary to the very day of its original release on April 16th, 1972. So that's going to be a couple weeks from now. Otherwise, thank you, Rob. Thank you very much. Otherwise, that's it. I mean, that's it for Some Like It Hot. Thank you so much for coming out. And you all have a good night. Thank